Folks, welcome back to Cross Politics Show and Podcast. We're actually in the backyard of my house today. That's where our studio's located. And we're overlooking the Palouse Hills, which is kind of a perfect artistic backdrop for our discussion on cool hipster Christianity. I have my co-host, Pastor Toby Sumter, with me. And a very special guest that we're interviewing today from LA is Brett McCracken. So thank you. Welcome to the show, Brett. Appreciate it. Watch out for the bees flying around.
Bees just adding to the ambiance. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So let me introduce Brett. Brett is a writer and journalist based out of Southern California, although I don't consider LA Southern California.
Orange County now.
Okay, you're in Orange County now?
My
Okay.
Twitter still said Los Angeles.
Okay.
OC.
You fooled me. And he's author, writer, wrote Hipster Christianity, When the Church and Cool Collide. He also wrote Gray Matters, Navigating the Space Between Legalism and Liberty. And you're a guest speaker and lecturer. You graduated from Wheaton College, UCLA also. So you got a BA from UCLA too.
BA from Wheaton, MA from UCLA.
Okay. And then you're the managing editor of Biola University's Biola magazine, and you're pursuing a master's at Talbot School of Theology. Mm-hmm. And you're married.
Yeah.
Your wife is Kira.
Yeah,
very good.
Yep.
No kids yet.
No kids yet, but we just bought a house last week, so we are transitioning into home ownership, and maybe the kids will be the next big thing. We'll see. So
our topic is around kind of largely around your book Hipster Christianity. I wanted to discuss cool. What is cool? What is the church striving for in culture?
I mean, that's a big question, and I think culture is such a big word that's overused as a kind of amorphous term for everything. I think the part of the impetus for me to write the book Hipster Christianity was what I saw as just the church's ongoing struggle with its relationship to culture in terms of what's out there, like church against culture, church above culture, the whole Niebuhr Christ and culture paradigm. That's always been a tension in church history. Just how does the church relate? How does the culture of the church relate to the culture outside?
What does Athens have to do with
Jerusalem? What does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? So I grew up in the church. I've been familiar with just that tension and that dialogue intimately, in part because I've been someone who loves pop culture and movies, and I grew up like loving all of that. So for me, the tension was very real. Like, how do I reconcile like my church experience and my faith with the like music that I love, like Radiohead, and like the secular like films and TV shows? So the kind of furthest back origins of the book were just my own personal wrestle with this issue, but then I started seeing how the church was kind of answering the question of its relationship to culture through in an unhealthy way, I think, like this idolization of relevance, I think. So too often I think the church tries to think about pop culture mostly in this pragmatic, utilitarian way of like, what do we have to do and what kinds of music do we have to play to be relevant? So it's not an appreciation of culture as such, or kind of a love of the beauty and the goodness and the truth that exists out there. A lot of it is just kind of pragmatic, like what clothes do we have to wear, so to speak? How do we dress our church up in order to be relevant in this culture? And that's kind of what I saw with a lot of these hipster churches and these cool churches. Like, a lot of them were just inauthentic, and it was more just about like, how do we keep the young people interested and engaged? And it wasn't an authentic...
Trying to be authentic. They were more inauthentic.
Right, and we could talk all day about authenticity and what that means. That's kind of like culture. It's a word that's overused. But
I got a lot of jokes around that.
Yeah. Yep. So that's kind of just a first attempt to reply to that question.
So do you... I have not read your book yet, so I'll be one of the listeners who hasn't is getting brought up to speed here. But do you offer something of a positive, towards a more Christian interaction with culture in the book?
Yeah, I mean, it's what surprises people about the book is because when they see it, Hipster Christianity, a lot of people think it's like an apologetic for the movement, and I even know that some pastors picked it up as like a manual, like, oh, how do I make my church hipster?
Nice.
But it's the opposite. I mean, it's largely a critique of the kind of foolish nature of chasing after the ephemeral cool. Like, it's missing the point. It's making the dressing and the wrapping the main thing, and that's never a good thing. But I do have a few chapters where I talk about authentic Christian cool and how we don't want to throw all Christian hipsters under the bus. There are iterations of it that are genuine and that are not kind of the pragmatic, I'm just dressing like a hipster so that I can get more millennials in the door of my church. So I talk about inauthentic versus authentic Christian cool, but on the whole, the book comes down more as a critique of churches, Christians who are overly concerned with relevance and what's trendy now, because I just think in general that's a lost cause. You're always going to be a few steps behind when you're chasing after that, and there's more worthwhile things to spend your energy on.
I liked your last chapter, how you're kind of naming it and claiming it. The last chapter was relevance is not a fad.
Yeah.
And you took a word that everyone wants to identify with in a cool way or in a way that's very temporal.
Yeah.
And you kind of took relevance as being almost like everlasting. You talked about, basically John Knox to eternity.
Yeah.
Is what relevance should mean.
Right.
And I thought that was a good way to kind of take that temporal word that everyone identifies with and say, no, this is where we should be going with this.
Right.
We're talking about Christ's kingdom.
Right.
We aren't talking about holes in our jeans.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's where we shoot ourselves in the foot as Christians when we confuse where the true relevance of our faith lies. It doesn't lie in how caught up in the zeitgeist we are and how well we can quote all the right people and name drop all the right movies. We're relevant to the extent that we preach the everlasting gospel and kind of have confidence in the eternal truth that we espouse. The gospel is the most relevant thing that has ever touched the face of the earth, and why are we suddenly think we have to jazz that up with things in 2015 or 2016 that are supposedly relevant now? And that's, I think, in large part why the church in the West and in America is, in a bad state. So many people are just making that error. They think that in order to be relevant going forward, we have to change everything and reevaluate everything and figure out what the millennials want us to be. And that's
the latest survey.
What's the latest survey say? And a lot of that is also just the problem of how much business kind of principles have infiltrated the church and marketing and all of that, and consumerism. That's American Christianity is,
How do you not sell out to the idol of relevance on the one hand, but also not leave the world behind, I guess, in a certain way? It would seem like we need Christians making really good sitcoms.
Right.
I think.
You're absolutely right, and I think there can be a middle ground between authentically Christian, non-selling out culture making that isn't also detached and elitist or only speaking to the crowd or whatever. I think what's important is healthy institutions that can train the next generation of Christians to think and see Christianly. I think that's what's missing in the ghetto of Christian art making. There aren't great models, so that's where I go back to the Marilyn Robinsons and Terrence Malicks. I think they have a healthy contribution in that they are models, and maybe there's only a couple right now, but at least the next generation has a few people to look to and to be inspired by, and hopefully the more trickle down that happens, we'll have more and more models, and the institutions that are shaping people's creativity from a distinctly Christian point of view will get stronger and stronger. But yeah, I think ultimately the goal is to make the sitcoms and the shows that reach the masses, because that's how culture changes in the large scale. I mean, you can look at specific sitcoms and shows in the last 2 decades that have, like, I think single-handedly almost, like, changed the public opinion on sexuality and things like that. Like, there's great power in mass media.
Friends, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Friends, like, yeah, Will and Grace and, like, Ellen DeGeneres. I mean, there's just so many.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we need to have, like, Christians who are in that middle ground of, like, great artists, but also business savvy, like, marketing savvy, able to speak the language of the culture without selling out.
I think connected to that, you mentioned education, which I think is very central in all this. But also, maybe even before that, is like a parent's love. And not just love for their own children, but a love for what God's put in front of them. My dad's record vinyl collection will forever be etched in my mind, because my dad loved that music. And he would sit there, and he'd sit me and my brother down, and he would play his music, his vinyl collection for us. Yeah. And I didn't like the music then, but now actually I like it, and it because my dad loved it so much. I grew into liking that kind of old classic rock because my dad actually loved it so much. It got contagious to me. Yep. Even though for that hour I was maybe begrudging and I shouldn't have or whatever. But, you know, parents being passionate and loving what's in front of them, and I've seen this in my kids, has a huge impact on my kids. Yeah. I'm a horrible guitarist, and my kids love when I bring out the guitar because I like playing it. I really do. But, you know, God put this in front of you, and love it in a way that's infectious, you know, that's contagious and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. I always, when I speak to, like, parents groups, or, like, I've written articles for, like, homeschool parents magazines, I talk about this exact thing. Like, education is like 80% imitation. It's about, like, looking to models, and like, you don't learn the most things in life from textbooks. You learn by seeing how others do it. And so culture and appreciating culture and loving the arts is something we pick up from those around us. And so absolutely, parents need to be, like, loving things well in front of their children, and, like, pastors need to be, like, loving culture well in an authentic way, not in a pragmatic, like, I just name drop Coldplay, you know, how cool am I?
Chris Martin.
Right, yeah. I'm hip with the times. So you need to do it authentically, but I think it's so healthy to, like, have people who are just, like, publicly in love with a certain genre or a certain band. Like, that's why I'm, like, unabashedly, like, a Terrence Malick fanboy publicly, and it's kind of, like, you know, whatever, like, embarrassing that I never say a bad word about him, and I probably should be more nuanced in my critique of him, but I hear a lot from people, like, young up and coming filmmakers who have read my reviews over the years, how much they appreciate, like, my, like, overt passion, and how alive I get in my writing when I write about him. And I think that's, like, good criticism. Like, I love reading critics who you can just tell, like, they're, like, not just going through the motions, they're, like, really engaging this with their heart and soul, and they love this beautiful thing. And I think we need to do that more in the church. We don't want to be treating culture as a mercenary that we just name drop because it makes us cool. We need to be engaging culture in a way that's, like, incarnational and, like, gets our blood pumping, because it connects with us in the way God made us.
One of the things that I sometimes tell students that are interested in the arts, or maybe other cultural pursuits where there's just this massive gravity or current pulling in a particular direction of, you know, conformity to a certain worldview expectations, is that they need to have, as they get into something, they need to have something up front that requires them to stand with Jesus. And just, like, bust it on the front end, because I think there's a sense in which you want to sort of slide in the back and be like, maybe I can just kind of cozy up to them and they'll kind of get to know me for who I am, and then one day maybe I'll just drop that, you know, I go to church sometimes. And they're already compromised. They're already compromised by that point, like, up to their neck in it. And so I urge them, like, go in on the front end, you know, and I love Jesus, and I'm excited about what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, like just on the front end, you know, and I, you know, can't work Sundays because I love Jesus and I'm at church,
Right.
you know, or whatever it is.
Right.
But like, put it out front, and like just trust God. I mean that's what that's what Daniel and his friends do in Babylon.
Right.
You know, they're like, there's this thing about the diet, you know, just can't do
Right.
that, you know.
Yeah. Sorry. That's just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it seems like Christians have to be willing to put that out front.
Totally.
Well, you know, and not in like cheesy ways, like, you know, look at my cross, or look, I've got a fish sticker on the back of my car. Like, it's not, you know, whatever.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to do it in meaningless ways, but I totally agree, and I think that there is a lack of courage among a lot of Christians to just be out with it. But I think our cultural relevance and our ability to like forge connections in the world will be stronger actually if we don't hide from who we are and like what we believe. You can go about it in a way that isn't like horribly offensive and off-putting on the front end. Like, you don't have to lead with like, this is what I believe about homosexuality, although you don't want to like shy away from that when the push comes to shove either. But yeah, I think it's so important for us not to lose what the relevant thing about us actually is. Like, we're relevant as light in this world because of Christ. And like every conversation has to start with that, and the resurrection and the cross, and
That's really good.
so
let's end the discussion here. People might think this might be a leap, but I want to end talking about politics. It's actually, I think, very connected to what's going on in the church around relevance being cool, because you look our political wins. Everyone can recognize what's cool. Everyone can recognize a win, where the wind's blowing, which direction the wind's blowing, and that's kind of what our politics is all about. We have it's about being relevant to your base,
right,
and that message is shifted. I mean, I was born in '79. I can't believe how fast our culture has shifted in our politics of sex, in our politics of you know, states, president, executive orders. I mean, all these things that you couldn't imagine happening back in the 80s and 90s, even under Bill Clinton, who signed DOMA, right, Defense of Marriage Act. Bill signed that, Democratic bill, you know, and I can't imagine where we're at now, how we got here so fast. But I think it's all connected to this, because the church had no fault divorce first, before our culture had no fault divorce. You know, it's like we actually led in all these major areas before our culture started adopting that now. And now we're in a situation where to be principled is not cool. I mean, if you mention states' rights, you know, a principle that was foundational to the Constitution, if you mention certain things in the public square, you're an uncool politician, or you're just like, you're conservative, or you're a crazy right-wing Tea Party conservative, you know, that kind of thing. But now we're at this point where it's Trump or Hillary. Right. They're the same, different sides of the same coin. I mean, they really are. And we got Christians voting for Trump because they think he's better than Hillary. Right.
Again, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with like willingness to be a prophetic voice that's different, and I think we're out of time in politics where Christians just need to give up the dream of like power and like currying favor with like the current kings and, you know, rulers, because if it means compromising principles or like not saying certain things because it would get us in trouble, then it's not worth it. I mean, I think we can be a prophetic minority and kind of pull back from politics perhaps for a season, or reevaluate. I actually think it's a good turn of events ultimately right now for American evangelicals in politics. It's kind of like all of a sudden everything that was worked for so long in like the Christian Coalition days, and like it's gone. It's completely gone, and evangelicals don't really have power anymore. Like Trump is making that very clear that you know, I don't really need you, and Russell Moore, you're a nasty guy, you know?
Right.
And he's
Which is
like
awesome.
he's like the public head of the largest evangelical denomination. So, yeah, I think will be an interesting test to see how we respond in that courage to be a prophetic, while also being kind of powerless in a traditional sense. And there's power in being prophetic, but in a different sense, I think, than, yeah.
Yeah. Anything to add, Toby, before we close?
Not without opening massive.
I know.
Right. We just kind of ended on a huge topic.
Yeah.
We could talk
I
about
largely agree with everything. There's tons of rabbit trails to run
Yeah.
down. But,
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks for coming on Cross Politic. Really appreciate it. You know, when we like people, we invite them to come in the spring or summertime, which usually helps them to want to move up here. If we just want you to visit, we just have you come in the winter.
Yeah, I get it.
So consider this a springtime compliment.
It's a very, inviting place, I have to say.
Well, great. Well, I hope everyone enjoys this interview, and thanks for checking us out.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.